And I asked the defense attaché who'd been talking with AFRICOM and with the Joint Staff, is anything coming? Will they be sending us any help? Is there something out there? And he answered that the nearest help was in Aviano, and the nearest where there were fighter planes. And he said that it would take 2 to 3 hours for them to get on site, but that there also were no tankers available for them to refuel. And I said, thank you very much. And we went on with our work. Phase 3 begins with news that the ambassador's body has been recovered. And David McFarland, if I recall correctly, is the individual who began to receive that news from his contacts in Benghazi. And we began to hear also that the ambassador has been taken to a hospital. We don't know initially which hospital it is, but through David's reports, we learn that it is in a hospital which is controlled by Ansar al-Sharia, the group that Twitter feeds had identified as leading the attack on the consulate. We're getting this information as the Tripoli response team arrives in Benghazi at the airport. Both our annex chief and the annex chief in Benghazi and our defense attaché are on the phone during this period trying to get the Libyan government to send vehicles and military and/or security assets to the airport to assist our response team. At this point, this response team looks like it may be a hostage rescue team, that we are going to need to send them to try to save the ambassador, who is in a hospital that is, as far as we know, under enemy control. Our contacts with the government in Tripoli are telling us that the ambassador is in a safe place, but they imply that he is with us in the annex in Benghazi. And we keep telling them, no, he is not with us. We do not have him. At about 12:30, at the same time that we see the Twitter feeds that are asserting that Ansar al-Sharia is responsible for the attack, we also see a call for an attack on the embassy in Tripoli. And so we begin to, we had always thought that we were under threat, but we now have to take care of ourselves. And we begin planning to evacuate our facility. When I say our facility, I mean the State Department residential compound in Tripoli, and to consolidate all of our personnel at the annex in Tripoli. We have about 55 diplomatic personnel in the 2 annexes. On that night, if I may go back, I would just like to point out that with Ambassador Stevens and Sean Smith in Benghazi, there are 5 diplomatic security agents, assistant regional security officers. With us at our residential compound in Tripoli, we have the RSO John Martinek, 3 assistant regional security officers protecting 28 diplomatic personnel. In addition, we also have 4 Special Forces personnel who are part of the training mission. During the night, I'm in touch with Washington, keeping them posted of what's happening in Tripoli and, to the best of my knowledge, what I'm being told in Benghazi. I think at about 2 p.m., 2 a.m., sorry, the Secretary of State Clinton called me, along with her senior staff. We're all on the phone. And she asked me what was going on, and I briefed her on the developments. Most of the conversation was about the search for Ambassador Stevens. It was also about what we were going to do with our personnel in Benghazi. And I told her that we would need to evacuate. And that was she said that was the right thing to do. At about 3 a.m., I received a call from the Prime Minister of Libya. I think it's the saddest phone call I've ever had in my life. He told me that Ambassador Stevens had passed away. I immediately telephoned Washington that news afterwards, and began accelerating our effort to withdraw from the Villas compound and move to the annex. Excuse me, I'll take a glass of water. Our team responded with amazing discipline and courage in Tripoli and organizing our withdrawal. I have vivid memories of that. I think the most telling, though, was of our communications staff dismantling our communications equipment to take with us to the annex and destroying the classified communications capability. Our office manager, Amber Pickens, was everywhere that night, just throwing herself into some task that had to be done. First, she was taking a log of what we were doing. Then she was loading magazines, carrying our ammunition supply to our vehicles. Then she was smashing hard drives with an axe. Alan Greenfield, our management officer, was a whirlwind of activity, organizing the vehicles, to lining them up, finding the drivers, making sure everybody was getting the things that they would need for the coming days. John Martinick was a mountain of moral support, particularly to the guys who were in Benghazi. He was on the phone talking them through the whole ordeal. David McFarland on the phone constantly, all the time, talking to his contacts in Benghazi, urging them to help. Lieutenant Colonel Phillips and Lieutenant Colonel Arndt, Lieutenant Colonel Gibson, mountains of strength. I'm awed. I'm still in awe of them. They asked me in one of the phone calls, when were you going to move to the annex? And I said, we'll move at dawn, because none of our people had great experience driving the armored Suburbans that we were going to have to use Our local staff drove for us as part of our security procedures. They, of course, were not there that night. And we would have to go through checkpoints, militia checkpoints, on the way to the annex to get there. And I didn't want our people to be going through those checkpoints because I didn't know what to expect from the militias. And so we moved at dawn. And we arrived at the annex, at least my group, I think, at about 4:45, perhaps, maybe 5 a.m. And a few minutes later came the word of the mortar attack. If I could return to Benghazi a little bit, talk through Tripoli. I'm sorry if I bounce back and forth, but the Tripoli team was basically had to stay at the Benghazi airport because they had no transport and no escort from the Libyans. After the announcement of Chris's passing, military escort and vehicles arrived at the airport. So the decision was made for them to go to the annex. Before I got the call from the Prime Minister, we had received several phone calls on the phone that had been with the ambassador, saying that we know where the ambassador is, please, you can come get him. And our local staff engaged on those phone calls admirably, asking very, very good, outstanding, even open-ended questions about where was he, trying to discern whether he was alive, whether they even had the ambassador, whether that person was with the ambassador. Send a picture. Could we talk to the ambassador? Because we knew separately from David that the ambassador was in a hospital that we believed was under Ansar Sharia's call, we suspected that we were being baited into a trap. And so we did not want to go send our people into an ambush. And we didn't. We sent them to the annex. Shortly after they arrived at the annex, the mortars came in. First mortar round was long. It landed actually among the Libyans who escorted our people. They took casualties for us that night. Then the next was short. The next three landed on the roof, killing Glenn and Tyrone, severely wounding David. They didn't know whether any more mortars were going to come in. The accuracy was terribly precise. The call was, the next one is coming through the roof, maybe if it hit. Two of the guys from Team Tripoli, they climbed up on the roof. They carried Glenn's body and Tyrone's body down. One guy, about Mark's size, full combat gear, climbed up there, strapped David Ubben, who's a large man, to his back, carried him down the ladder, saved him. In Tripoli, we had, the defense attaché had persuaded the Libyans to fly their C-130 to Benghazi. We wanted to airlift. Since we had consolidated at the annex and the Libyan government had now provided us with external security around our facilities, we wanted to send further reinforcements to Benghazi. We determined that Lieutenant Colonel Gibson and his team of Special Forces troops should go. The people in Benghazi had been fighting all night. They were tired, they were exhausted. We wanted to make sure the airport was secure for their withdrawal. As Colonel Gibson and his 3 personnel were getting in the cars, he stopped and he called them off and told me that he had not been authorized to go. The vehicles had to go because the flight needed to go to to Benghazi. Lieutenant Colonel Gibson was furious. I had told him to go bring our people home. That's what he wanted to do. Paid me a very nice compliment. I won't repeat it here. So the plane went. I think it landed in Benghazi around 7:30. The other thing that we did was, and I want to mention Jackie Levesque's name in this hearing. She was our nurse. We'd initially thought that she should go to Benghazi. One of the Special Forces with Lieutenant Colonel Gibson's team was our last military-trained medic available. He had a broken foot in a cast. I still remember him walking to go and get in the car with his machine gun, carrying a machine gun on his shoulder. But Jackie, I refused to allow her to go to Benghazi because I knew we had wounded coming back. I knew David was severely wounded, and I knew others were wounded as well. And Jackie had just made terrific contacts with a hospital in town. And so I sent her to that hospital to start mobilizing their ER teams and their doctors to receive our wounded. So that when the charter flight arrived in Tripoli, we had ambulances at the airport waiting. Their doctors were ready and waiting for our wounded to come in, to be brought in to the operating room. And they certainly saved David Ubben's leg, and they may have very well have saved his life. And they treated our other wounded as well, as if they were their own.
Mr. Hicks, I know you have the days that followed, but I think we all need to digest a little of what you just told us. So if we could pause there, and Mr. Cummings is recognized.
Thank you very much. Again, to all of you, we appreciate you being here. To you, Mr. Hicks, as you described what happened that night, it just reminded me of the high cost that is paid by so many of our folk in the diplomatic corps. It also reminded me of their bravery and the fact that you all go around the world in foreign places trying to make a difference. And as I listened to your testimony, I could not help but think about something that I said very recently, well, 2 years ago now, in a eulogy for a relative. I said that death is a part of life, but so often we have to find a way to make life a part of death. And I guess the reason why I'm saying that, I want to go back to something Mr. Nordstrom said when he was, he said that he wanted to make sure that, and you, all of you have said it pretty much, he wanted to make sure we learn from this so that your comrades and our 4 members of the diplomatic corps who sadly passed away, so that this never happens again. And I appreciate it. I know this is difficult. I know it is. We all feel your pain. And so I just want to, going back to what Mr. Nordstrom said, trying to make sure we have a complete picture. Because there's another piece to this too, and that is that we have some balancing here today to do today. We have to listen to you all, and this is really, really difficult because we've got some statements that have been made, not necessarily by you, but interpreted. While we have to protect you, we also have to protect your fellow employees. In other words, protect is maybe not the right word, but make sure that they're treated fairly. So you understand what I'm saying? The balance. And I'm just trying to make sure I get, in your words, Mr. Nordstrom, a complete picture. That's all. Mr. Hicks, in the interview with the committee staff, you stated, and I quote, "In my personal opinion, a fast mover flying over Benghazi at some point, you know, as soon as possible, might very well have prevented some of the bad things that happened that night." Is that right? Did you say that?
Yes, sir, I did.
And you further stated, and I quote, "I believe if we had been able to scramble a fighter or aircraft to over Benghazi as quickly as possible after the attack commenced, I believe there would not have been a mortar attack on the annex in the morning because I believe the Libyans would have split." Is that right?
Yes, sir.
At a hearing in February before the Senate Armed Services Committee, General Dempsey, Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, was asked whether we could have deployed F-16s from Aviano Air Base in Italy, and he explained why we could not. And these are his words, and we're just trying to make sure we get the complete picture here. For a couple of reasons, and I quote, this is a quote, "For a couple of reasons. One is that in order to deploy them, it requires this is the middle of the night now. These are not aircraft on strip alert. They're there as a part of our commitment to NATO and Europe. And so as we looked at the timeline, it was pretty clear that it would take up to 20 hours or so to get them there." Mr. Hicks, I understand that you wanted planes to get to Benghazi faster. If I were in your shoes, I would have wanted them to get there yesterday. And that is completely understandable, but the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff said they simply could not get there quickly. Mr. Hicks, do you have any reason to question General Dempsey's testimony before the Senate?
Again, I was speaking from my perspective.
I understand.
On the ground in Tripoli, based on what the defense attaché told me. And he said 2 to 3 hours.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
But there were no tankers.
All right.
And I also was speaking with reference to conversations I had had with veteran Libyan revolutionaries and other personnel who had experienced the Libyan revolution and who had told me that the Libyan people were very well aware of, that American and NATO air power had been decisive in their victory. And I was also speaking to their view, again, that Libyans would not stand if they were aware that American aircraft were in the vicinity.
I understand. So former Secretary of Defense Leon Panetta also testified in February, and he said this, and I quote, he said, "Soon after the initial reports about the attack, the President ordered all available DoD assets to respond to the attack in Libya and to protect U.S. personnel and interests in the region." Some have asked why other types of armed aircraft were not dispatched to Benghazi. The reason is because armed UAVs, AC-130 gunships, or fixed-wing fighters with associated tanking, armaments, targeting, and support capabilities were not in the vicinity of Libya, and because of the distance, would have taken at least 9 to 12 hours, if not more, to deploy. This was pure and simple, a problem of distance and time, end of quote. Do you question his testimony?
Sir, again, the defense attaché said to me that fighter aircraft in Aviano would not be able to be over Benghazi for 2 to 3 hours.
Mr. Cummings,
what I'm going on,
yep.
What the defense attaché told me.
Thank you. And I assure you that in regards to your earlier statement, we will bring in people where we can have that discussion, hopefully with knowledgeable people chosen on both sides of could they or couldn't they. I think it's a good line of questioning, perhaps not for the Ambassador.
Mr. Chairman,
you certainly could have another minute.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. But it's extremely important that I ask these questions because a lot has been put out there in the air, and all these folks aren't here for no reason. And I know we will get those questions answered, but all we have is you today, and I'm glad to have you. But in other words, I'm just trying, again, remember what I said to you all earlier. And everybody on this committee should know this. I try to do everything in my power to protect witnesses. I don't care if they are called by Republicans or Democrats, because your integrity and your reputation is all you got. But I also have some other people whose reputations are being questioned. So I've got to, take what you say, but I also got to consider them too, because I have a duty to both of them. You follow me? Just have one last thing, Mr. Chairman, then I'll finish up. And I'll just close by noting that even the partisan report issued by our 5 Republican chairmen in April, including our good Chairman Issa, cleared the Defense Department. It said this. It says, and I quote, "No evidence has been provided to suggest that these officials refuse to deploy resources because they thought the situation had been sufficiently resolved." I'll end there, and out of courtesy to all of our colleagues, and again, I don't know whether we'll get into a second round, but again, I promise you, I promise every one of you, I will do every single thing in my power to make sure, I hope there's no retaliation, but to protect you, because you are so very, very important, and it is your bravery that have brought you here today, and we really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. We now go to the gentleman from South Carolina, Mr. Gowdy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To the families of the victims, it's been 8 months. And I know that there are those who have said that's a long time ago. But the good news is there is no statute of limitations when it comes to finding out the truth, particularly for those who have served and sacrificed and died under our flags. So, Mr. Hicks, let's find out the truth. The President of Libya responded to the attack and labeled it an attack by Islamic extremists, possibly with terror links, correct?
Yes, sir.
So hours after our ambassador and 3 others are killed in Benghazi, the president of Libya says it was an attack with possible terror links, correct?
Yes, sir, that's what I recall.
Did the president of Libya ever mention a spontaneous protest related to a video?
No, sir.
When Ambassador Stevens talked to you, perhaps minutes before he died, as a dying declaration, what precisely did he say to you?
He said, Greg, we're under attack.
Would a highly decorated career diplomat have told you or Washington had there been a demonstration outside his facility that day?
Yes, sir, he would have.
Did he mention one word about a protest or a demonstration?
No, sir, he did not.
So fast forward, Mr. Hicks, to the Sunday talk shows and Ambassador Susan Rice. She blamed this attack on a video. In fact, she did it 5 different times. What was your reaction to that?
I was stunned. My jaw dropped, and I was embarrassed.
Did she talk to you before she went on the 5 Sunday talk shows?
No, sir.
You were the highest-ranking official in Libya at the time, correct?
Yes, sir.
And she did not bother to have a conversation with you before she went on national television?
No, sir.
So Ambassador Rice directly contradicts the evidence on the ground in Libya. She directly contradicts the president of Libya. She directly contradicts the last statement uttered by Ambassador Stevens. Mr. Hicks, who is Beth Jones?
Beth Jones is the Acting Assistant Secretary for Near Eastern Affairs at the State Department.
I want to read an excerpt from an email she sent, and you were copied on it. And by the way, Mr. Chairman, for our colleagues who like to trumpet bipartisanship, this would be a wonderful opportunity to demonstrate it. Some of these emails, even though they're not classified, have not been released, Mr. Chairman, including the one that I'm going to read from. So for my colleagues who trumpet bipartisanship, this would be a wonderful time to prove it. This is from Ms. Jones to you, to counsel for Hillary Clinton, to Victoria Nuland, to Mr. Kennedy, near as I can tell, to almost everyone in the State Department, and I'm going to read from it. I spoke to the Libyan ambassador and emphasized the importance of Libyan leaders continuing to make strong statements. By the way, Mr. Hicks, this email was sent on September the 12th, the day after Benghazi, and several days before Ambassador Rice's television appearance. And I'll continue. When he said his government suspected that former Gaddafi regime elements carried out the attacks, I told him that the group that conducted the attacks, Ansar al-Sharia, is affiliated with Islamic terrorists. Let me say that again, Mr. Hicks. She told him, the State Department, on September the 12th, days before our ambassador went on national television, is telling the ambassador to Libya, the group that conducted the attacks, Ansar al-Sharia, is affiliated with Islamic terrorists. Mr. Hicks, I want to know 2 things. Number one, why in the world would Susan Rice go on 5 Sunday talk shows and perpetuate a demonstrably false narrative? And secondarily, what impact did it have on the ground in Benghazi, the fact that she contradicted the president of Libya?
As to the first question, I cannot provide an answer, but perhaps you should ask Ambassador Rice.
I would love the opportunity to do just that.
As to the second question, at the time we were trying to get the FBI to Benghazi to begin its investigation. And that talk show actually provided an opportunity to make that happen. Afterwards, we encountered bureaucratic resistance for a long period from the Libyans. The Libyan government at this time is not very deep. President, Prime Minister, Deputy Prime Ministers, ministers, all capable people, some vice ministers as well. And it took us an additional my math's not very fast these days, maybe 18 days to get the FBI team to Benghazi.
So the crime scene was unsecured for 18 days.
Yes, sir.
Witnesses were not interviewed.
Would the gentleman would please finish up? We're going to try and move along.
Yes, I will move on. We will finish this if there is a second round. Thank you, Mr. Hicks.
Thank you. For all individuals, to the extent that our witnesses can stay on, we will try to have a second round, but the ranking member and I both realize that we're a little behind schedule, and I take blame for it, but we're going to try and move within 5 minutes of questioning whenever possible. The gentlelady from New York, Ms. Maloney.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Is this on? I want to thank all the witnesses and thank you for your public service, and my condolences to the families for your great loss. And I want to thank the American military. My father served in World War II, my brother in Vietnam, my husband in the Navy, and I can say after close observation, there is no place or no time that the American military wouldn't be there to protect American lives if they possibly could get there. And I find it truly disturbing and very unfortunate that when Americans come under attack, the first thing some did in this country was attack Americans, attack the military, attack the President, attack the State Department, attack the former senator from the great state of New York, former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton. And I would like to ask some questions about these attacks to get at the real facts. Last month, Chairman Issa went on national television and accused former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, accused her of lying under oath when she testified before Congress that she did not personally approve of security reductions in Libya. As proof, he claimed that she personally signed a cable denying requests for additional security. And he stated, and I quote, "The Secretary of State was just wrong. She said she did not participate in this, and yet, only a few months before the attack, she outright denied security in her signature in a cable in April 2012. The fact is that the Secretary did not sign this cable in 2012. Her name was typed at the bottom of the page, which is just the general procedure for thousands of cables that come out of the State Department every single year. So I would like to ask the panelists and our witnesses just one question, and it concerns the State Department Correspondence Manual, which is posted on the Department's website. And this manual says, and I quote, "The Communications Center will place the name of the Secretary on all telegrams to posts," end quote. Now, I would like to ask the panelists in a yes or no question, do you agree that this is the proper procedure or the procedure that's followed by the State Department, that thousands and thousands of cables leave the Department headquarters every single year with the Secretary's name at the bottom of the page or on the page? And I would like to know, Mr. Nordstrom, yes or no, do you agree with the manual? Is that the procedure of the State Department?
That's my understanding of the prevailing
Mr. Hicks, yes or no?
Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Thompson, yes or no, is that the procedure?
Yes.
Well, 2 days after Chairman Issa made these accusations, the Washington Post ran a fact-checker article called The Whopper. And I would like to ask unanimous consent to place this in the record.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you. Well, what the fact checker said was this, quote, "There was no basis or evidence to show that Clinton had anything to do with this cable, any more than she personally approved a cable on proper email etiquette. The odds are extremely long that Secretary Clinton ever saw or approved this memo, giving us confidence that these inflammatory and reckless language qualifies as a whopper and for Pinocchios," end quote. So anyone who actually knows how the State Department operates knows that she was speaking the truth. She was talking about the procedure that was in the manual. There is no way in the world that she could sign every cable coming out, and when she said she didn't sign it, she did not sign it. So
The gentlelady's time has expired, but if anyone wants to respond, they may. Hearing none, we'll go to the gentleman from Utah, Mr. Chaffetz.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you all three for you being here, and thank you for the families, loved ones who passed away. Mr. Hicks, I want to go back to that first plane from Tripoli. It went from Tripoli, as noted in the ARB report, included 7 rescue team members, including two U.S. military personnel. That plane then returns to Tripoli, and the first rescue team that is there is now really engaged in the attack. You have no idea, as my understanding, as to when the attack is going to end. So the second rescue team is preparing to go. And I want you mentioned it in your opening statement, but if you could please go back to what the second team, now the second team included 4 U.S. military. These are highly trained Special Forces personnel, one of which is a medic. And yet these military personnel do not operate under your authority, and your permission is not enough for them to go. Explain to me again exactly what happened. Again, we determined that we needed to send a second team from Tripoli to secure the airport for the withdrawal of our personnel from Benghazi after the mortar attack. But were any of these U.S. military personnel not permitted to travel on a rescue mission or relief mission to Benghazi? They were not authorized to travel.
What happened with those personnel?
They remained in Tripoli with us. The medic went with the nurse to the hospital to lend his skills to the treatment of and care of our wounded.
How did the personnel react to being told to stand down?
They were furious. I can only say, well, I will quote Lieutenant Colonel Gibson. He said, "This is the first time in my career that a diplomat has more balls than somebody in the military."
So the military is told to stand down, not engage in the fight. These are the kind of people willing to engage. Where'd that message come down? Where'd the stand down order come from?
I believe it came from either AFRICOM or SOC Africa.
Now, my understanding is that General Ham was actually not in Stuttgart, where AFRICOM's headquartered, but he was in Washington, D.C. Is that correct?
I don't know the whereabouts of General Ham on that night.
Mr. Chairman, this is something that we're going to have to continue to explore. I need to move quickly now to Mr. Thompson, if I could. You are the leader there at what's called the FEST within the State Department. According to the State Department website, the FEST is the Foreign Emergency Support Team, the U.S. government's only interagency on-call short-notice team poised to respond to terrorist attacks worldwide. I want to read to you an excerpt of an email sent by you to Kathleen Austin Ferguson on Tuesday, September 11th, 2012 at 9:58 p.m. Could you help me understand who is Kathleen Austin Ferguson?
She is Under Secretary Kennedy's deputy.
You wrote, quote, "I am told that Pat Kennedy participated in a very senior conference call with the White House and discouraged a FEST option.
To remind, FEST has dedicated aircraft able to respond in 4 hours, is Department of State led, and provides the below skills. When FBI was contacted, they responded that this situation would be better addressed via a FEST response. Thus, there are others who are thinking the same way. Ready to discuss further as needed. Mark, 2 questions.
Can the gentleman suspend for a moment? Earlier, there was one document that had not been placed in the record because it hadn't been provided through official channels, and I'd ask that we get that. I think it came from Mr. Gowdy. And then, Mr. Chaffetz, if you could make your document available so we could make copies. And then for any other members on either side of the dais, if you plan to use a document that is not currently committee record, and I realize since we've gotten very little, there's very little committee records, please do us the favor of having copies so they can be distributed at or prior to the beginning of the questioning. I'm sorry to interrupt.
Mr. Chairman, no, just one thing. Mr. Chairman, as you recall yesterday, I reminded you that we had never, with regard to Mr. Thompson, this is the first time we've gotten a syllable from him.
Right, and we have no transcript of it either.
But let me go on. One of the things I said in our conversation is that if there were any documents that were going to be used, we'd like to have had them yesterday. But with regard to this document, and it sounds like it's a very crucial document, and in fairness to everybody, to all of us, and to Mr. Nordstrom, who said he wanted a complete hearing, we'd just like to have that document, even if we had to suspend. So before, we'd like to see the document that he's talking about. You know.
Okay. In the case of this particular document, Mr. Chaffetz, my understanding is you do have the document. So I'll let staff work on that and provide additional time if needed, if that turns out not to be true. For our witnesses, if you have any documents you're going to refer to that we don't have, if you'd have your counsels allow copies to be made. Again, I want to make sure everyone has it as soon as possible. Obviously, if the State Department had made the documents they show us so-called in camera, if they'd allowed us to have copies, we'd all have a lot more documents. But
thank you, Mr. Chairman.
That's for a different argument. Mr. Chaffetz, I'm sorry, we'll give you back a couple of seconds, and you gentlemen may continue.
Mr. Thompson, do you recall that email?
I do.
2 questions. Were you ever given a detailed explanation as to why the FEST was not considered for deployment? And number 2, did you attend or attempt to attend any senior meetings to plead your case for a FEST deployment? And if so, what happened?
The reason I was given was that this was not the time for the FEST. It might be too unsafe for the FEST. And I got that through Ms. Austin Ferguson. I readdressed that with her. I readdressed it with her staff 2 days later.
Did you attempt to attend any meetings?
The next morning there were VTCs. I presumed I would be part of that. I was told not to attend those, although CT was represented there. The FEST portion and the response portion of the Counterterrorism Bureau was not represented there.
So why were you not called into action? This is what you trained for. It's what tabletops are for. It's what you're prepared to do. Why was FEST not called into action?
I do not know.
Mr. Chairman, this is one of the great mysteries. Here we have this expertise. We've invested heavily in it. They tabletop it. They understand it. This is exactly what they trained for, and they were never asked to go into action. We had no idea how long or when this was going to end. Yield back.
I thank the gentleman, and the gentleman is correct. We now recognize the gentlelady from the District of Columbia, Ms. Norton, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Thompson, first I want to say to the families that we continue to feel deeply about your loss. I have some questions for Mr. Thompson concerning the role of the Counterterrorism Bureau. Now, Mr. Thompson, your lawyer said you were unwilling to talk with any Democratic member of this committee, so I've had to rely on statements that were made to the press. Your own statement is mostly biographical about the work you've done in Yemen and Latin America and the rest. Now, one report I found indicated that you believe that Secretary Clinton and Ambassador Patrick Kennedy, and here I'm quoting from this report, tried to cut the Counterterrorism Bureau out of the loop as they and other Obama administration officials weighed how to respond to and characterize the Benghazi attacks. Now, that's the end of that quote. Mr. Thompson, I'm asking you, is that a quote, is that quote accurate, that you believe that the Counterterrorism Bureau was intentionally kept out of the loop for political reasons?
It is not. I indicated that the portion of the Counterterrorism Bureau that responds to crises, i.e., part of the office, was pushed out of that discussion. The Counterterrorism Bureau was represented in subsequent meetings after the night of 9/11.
So, do you believe you were kept out for political reasons? This quote makes it.
I do not politicize my job, Madam. I have served under 3 presidents, starting with President Clinton up to the present. I have served 6 secretaries.
I've got to continue. Mr. Thompson, I was just quoting the quote. So the quote isn't entirely accurate then?
Correct.
All right. That's very important for the record, that Mr. Thompson is not saying that they were kept out of the loop for political reasons. This week, this quote apparently caused your former boss in the Counterterrorism Bureau at the State Department, I'm speaking now of Ambassador Daniel Benjamin, to issue a public statement disagreeing with this allegation in particular, which was in quotes. And he said, and I am now quoting him, "It has been alleged that the State Department's Counterterrorism Bureau was cut out of the discussion and decision-making in the aftermath of the Benghazi attacks. I ran the Bureau then, and I can say with certainty that as the former coordinator for counterterrorism, that this charge is simply untrue." Do you agree with Ambassador Benjamin?
I agree that the Counterterrorism Bureau was included, but there's a distinction with a difference with respect to the portion of the Counterterrorism Bureau that would be most effective in the aftermath of an attack.
Now, all of this was under Ambassador
compound.
Benjamin. He didn't say one portion or the other. You are yourself saying, although the Bureau was represented, somehow some portions of the Bureau were not represented. And how is that?
That's what happened, ma'am.
It says the Bureau, he says going on, was a central participant in the interagency discussion about the longer-term response to Benghazi. At no time was the Bureau sidelined or otherwise kept from carrying out its tasks. This seems to me to directly contradict your testimony here today. He says,
I respectfully disagree.
We were all in. You say, well, yeah, you were in, but somehow the other, some part of it was not in.
No other part of the Counterterrorism Bureau is responsible for responding to a crisis. This was a crisis. My office was in subsequent meetings. Other members of the office were very professional people, and I'm sure they did their best at those meetings.
Well, we certainly don't want to get involved in who down the chain of line gets consulted. But the ambassador says after the attack, the first question to arise that involved the Counterterrorism Bureau was whether or not the Foreign Emergency Support Team should be deployed. The question of deployment was posed early, and the Department decided against such a deployment. In my view, it was appropriate to pose the question, and the decision was a correct one. Now, were you aware that your superiors were consulted about the decision not to employ the Foreign Emergency Support Team?
You can go ahead and answer that, although the gentlelady's time has expired.
As earlier indicated, ma'am, I was told that by the Undersecretary of Management's office. The normal process for deploying the team is that at the Assistant Secretary level, at a counterterrorism security group at the White House, those options are discussed. At that convening of that CSG, that decision is recommended or not recommended to the Deputies Committee. It is not solely a State Department function or authority to launch the Foreign Emergency Support Team, even though we are one part of it.
I thank the gentleman. We now go to the gentleman from Oklahoma, Mr. Lankford.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Hicks, when you arrived in July, did the facilities in Benghazi meet the minimum OSPB security standards set by the State Department?
According to the regional security officer at the time in Tripoli, John Martinek, they did not.
What about the facilities in Tripoli? The Benghazi facilities did not meet the minimum standards of the facilities in Tripoli?
Again, according to the regional security officer in Tripoli, John Martinek, they were very weak, yes. They did not meet.
They did not meet. Do you think they were close to meeting the standards?
No, sir.
Mr. Nordstrom, before you left as the RSO, did the facilities have the number of security personnel that you had requested?
No, they did not.
Mr. Nordstrom, there are a very, very small number of facilities worldwide that are considered by GAO critical or high threat level for personnel serving in our different embassies and consulates. Tripoli and Benghazi, were they listed as critical or high threat level?
They were. That was something that I had put in my written testimony as well.
Correct. By statute, Mr. Nordstrom, who has the authority to place personnel in a facility that does not meet the minimum OSPB standards?
As I had noted in there, the OSPB standards go in tandem with SECA, which is Secure Embassy Construction, both of which derived out of the East Africa bombings or were strengthened after that. It's my understanding that since we were the sole occupants of both of those facilities, Benghazi and Tripoli, the only person who could grant waivers or exceptions to those was the Secretary of State.
Mr. Hicks, why was Ambassador Stevens headed to Benghazi? There were a lot of concerns about him. There were a lot of security issues that Mr. Nordstrom has listed in numerous reports leading up to his trip there. Why was the Ambassador headed there?
According to Chris, Secretary Clinton wanted Benghazi converted into a permanent constituent post. Timing for this decision was important. Chris needed to report before September 30th, the end of the fiscal year, on the physical and the political and security environment in Benghazi to support an action memo to convert Benghazi from a temporary facility to a permanent facility. In addition, Chris wanted to make a symbolic gesture to the people of Benghazi that the United States stood behind their dream of establishing a new democracy.
Why was this timing important? Was it significant that he went right now? Was there some hesitation about him going at that moment for that length of time? Could he have waited a couple more months to be able to go?
He had originally planned to go to Benghazi in October, but we had a 2-week gap in the principal officer position. Eric Gaudiosi was departed on August 31st, and his replacement was not due in the country until September 15th. We covered the initial 10-day period with David McFarland, and then the ambassador chose to go. And again, he chose to go for those reasons.
What was the timeline on trying to make this a permanent facility, or was there anything pending that had to be accomplished by a certain deadline?
We had funds available that could be transferred from an account set aside for Iraq and could be dedicated to this purpose. They had to be obligated by September 30th.
Okay. And where did those instructions come from?
This came from the Executive Office of the Bureau of Near Eastern Affairs.
So they were told to go ahead and check everything out, get the process going in Benghazi because we had to do it, and we had to do it right now. He planned to go in October, but said we've got to get there earlier and get this started in. Plus, there was an opening as well of the principal officer.
That's right.
Mr. Nordstrom, on March the 28th, there is a cable that you sent to Washington requesting to keep the diplomatic security that you already had on the ground, that level of security, and not have that level of security decreased. Did you draft that cable?
I did.
Who was the intended recipient of that cable?
Generally, those types of requests would go to our diplomatic security personnel, certainly DAS Charlene Lamb, who was with me before in October, testified, and certainly to Undersecretary of Management and Near Eastern Affairs would typically be the distribution for that.
Okay. Thank you. My time is expired.